evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We have another of our CPD sessions tonight in maths. We're absolutely delighted to welcome again Patrick Davies of Highfield School. He's one of our maths setters. In fact, he's our lead maths setter. So he is absolutely the place to come for information about our new maths specifications. The aim of all these sessions is to support you delivering these new specifications for CE, and this session is going to focus on the differences in the new spec, reflecting on the first year of teaching and preparing for the next. Our aim at ISEB is to improve our assessments at every opportunity. So we'll also be discussing how the new spec encourages the development of problem-solving skills in our next session with another of our setters, Paul Burrows. Make sure you sign up on Eventbrite for that next maths session. That's on June the 21st, and there's currently an early bird discount if you book soon. So make sure you go over to Eventbrite at the end of this session and book for that. It should be great. There is another reminder that ISEB has finally gone digital. You can find us on social media at ISEB Awards on all channels. We'd love to see you. Come and be our friend. And once Patrick's session has finished, there will be a time for questions. So this is a reminder that at the moment, if you are not seeing or not able to access the chat function, you need to be logged into Google, or you need to be logged into YouTube, and you will then be able to pose any questions on the chat for us. Now, whilst we won't be addressing them in the main session, I will be keeping a log of them, and we'll be asking all of those and some questions that you had pre-sent us. Thank you to all of you that have done that. We'll be asking those at the end. So without much further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Patrick, who is going to talk to you about the new maths specs.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I expect thousands watching at the moment, although I can see nobody apart from myself on the screen. I hope you appreciate my purple light, which I've switched on to cheer us all up, but I'm sorry about the beige shirt, which doesn't really complement it. Now, I'm going to hopefully share my screen this time. Last time I failed to share my screen to start off with, and some technical reason, I'm sure. But this time I'm going to share my entire screen and switch my application to PowerPoint. Death by PowerPoint. I think there's 123 pages of PowerPoint to get through, which I'll do very, very quickly indeed. So the new math specifications, which start next. A new style common entrance, the biggest change for many, many years. Hopefully a change for the better to improve things, update it for the new world in which we live. So currently, you're thinking about preparing your year 7s for the exams next year. And what we're ready to do is have less pressure on children. Children are under too much pressure these days. And it's not good for their mental health. It's not good for their education. What we're trying to do is make the papers for your children a little bit shorter, a little bit lighter, and hopefully they would get high scores. Creativity. I watched a TED talk where he showed it to my year 7s actually about the Fibonacci sequence. And the guy started off saying, mathematics is all about calculation and then application. But what is missed out most of all is inspiration. And we want to leave time and space in the curriculum for more inspiration, not just for the basic skills, which are very important, of course, but more creativity. So what's in the new papers? The new papers should be more friendly, slightly shorter to give more time to think and for better working. We are asking for units to be written to make people think a little bit more about what the questions mean. And the papers will be a bit more graduated in difficulty, so they'll start easier. The core papers, which are the replacement for the current level 2, will start off looking a little bit more like a level 1 paper. And they'll be quite predictable to begin with, but towards the end, there will be more novel, interesting, different, unpredictable questions, which children will have to think for themselves to solve the puzzles and problems. So, going from the papers, there'll be no constructions, significant figures at the core level, no drawing of pie charts. So we're taking out some of these drawing type activities because we think they are more readily explored and tested outside the exam. Drawing flower patterns and building polyhedra and the like is great creative work, and not really so good in exam conditions. And note averages derived from frequency tables, which is a bit of a tedious thing to do, keeping it a bit more straightforward and a bit lighter in terms of topics. At the higher level, no inequalities. That's one thing that we're removing from the higher level, which is the additional paper now, the replacement to the level 3. So the core papers are designed for nearly all candidates. This is the aim, so that higher level candidates will take the core. And many people who currently are aiming for level 1 hopefully should be able to access the core papers as well, but there should be enough routine stuff and more accessible style that they'll be able to show what they can do along with everybody else on a level playing field. And this should suit many senior schools, of course, who want that level playing field, and not give them the option to block them taking the level 1, as it were. Because currently many children who would be better off taking the level 1 have to take the level 2, which will be the new core, which should be more accessible for them. Hopefully, that is the aim, at least, anyway. A new additional paper. So this is on top of the core paper for the higher level candidates, which we'll look at shortly. But there will be a foundation paper as well for the very weakest, those who really can't access the core level. There'll be a much more basic foundation paper, simpler than the level 1 at the moment, with just fewer topics to make sure you can do your basic maths, and more practical as well. So the mental arithmetic test is changing as well. Currently, the mental arithmetic test is a bit of a misnomer. It's too hard for many children. It's too stressful for some of the weakest ones under time pressure. And we trialed this new version several years back, and it was very popular both with the teachers and with the children. So this is from specimen paper. So it starts off with very, very straightforward routine questions. It's a written test. There's no CD. It's not read out. And you have 10 minutes to answer as many as you can. So weaker candidates could go a little slower and get the easy ones right at the beginning. As it progresses, just telling you a few tips and tricks on the way. We're not looking for people to work things out in tedious, boring ways. We're looking for people to work out things in clever ways. 18 times 5, don't do a short multiplication, or just try and convert it to something simpler. Halving and doubling is one technique. Fairly obviously grouping things in tens. Probably they'd learn this about year 3. They're looking for the 7 and 3 makes 10, that sort of thing. Obviously division, hopefully cancelling down would help things become easier. It's what maths is all about, making it easier. And converting repeated addition into multiplication, obviously, something along those sort of lines. You'd hope them to spot that would be 70 times 6. The sort of tips and tricks and techniques. So as the mental test progresses, it starts to get a little more tricky, but still lots of basic questions that most candidates should be able to get right. Then it becomes more like the old paper, except it's not read out, it's simply written questions. But towards the end, we're going to have a few really tricky ones to test out the most able. And we found it worked extremely well. We got a very, very positive response from the trial. And the range of scores from the hundreds of children who took the test almost exclusively ranged from 50% to very nearly 100%. Nobody got 100%. And nearly everybody got pretty much over 50%, which was far better for them than the weaker ones failing with sort of 3, 4, 5 out of 20, which they might currently get. So it was very well received and still tested well, gave a good range of scores. Now, the core papers. First of all, the core non-calculated paper. Now, these are not the specimen papers. This is a pair of papers that I just quickly knocked together actually to try on my year 7s to see how they got on. So these are not quite the real things, but the style of the papers is very similar to what you might expect. We're starting off with some level 1 style questions, testing their real fundamental basic skills. So matching up some fractions, understanding decimals on a number line. You can see here we're just filling in answers. Now, question 2 shows us how the new style is going to work with no answer line, just a space for your working in the grey box. So it makes it clear to children where you're expected to show working, or conversely, where you can just fill in answers. And we're hoping children will make it clear where their final answer is by double underlining their final answer like that. This is popular on question 3 with many people having squares where arithmetic is expected, just to make it easier, especially for children with special needs, to set things out clearly as they might expect to do in an exercise book. Routine, basic questions, which just lay the foundations, make sure they can do some good core basic maths. Here are question 5, just fill in the answers. The question that the children know they don't have to show any working, not expected to show any working for those ones. Just scooting through these. Now, question 7 is becoming a little more interesting. We're not leading you through one step and another step. We're giving you a problem. Clearly, you'll have to work out the area of that triangle first, and that should be accessible to most candidates. They should know how to work out the area of a triangle. Notice units on the end. And the second question is the slight puzzle, but not too difficult. And notice there's 5 marks available. So we're allowing a few extra marks for good working and units. So there are slightly fewer questions on the paper, but more marks available for each question. Question 8, very similar to current level 2 style questions, just the format is a little different. Of course, the way these are laid out on the page is actually saving us quite a lot of paper. We're able to get the papers now onto 12 sides instead of 16 sides, which must be very good for the environment in many ways. Now, question 11, look at that question. We're not telling you how to estimate this. We're not saying by rounding either off to one decimal place or one significant, just estimate. There might be 1 or 2 different ways of doing this. It's up to children to give it their best shot. And clearly a nice elegant method would be that. They're all about 30, and how many 30s are there? There are 8 of them. Algebra looks very similar to the current level of algebra, but we're keeping it a little easier perhaps, not making it too difficult at the core level. Just can you solve your equations? Can you do your basic substitution? Here's a nice stark little problem. So you just solved some equations. How do you do that? Well, with a bit of experience, candidates might realize that they need to form an equation and solve it before they could work out the perimeter. But again, you're not led through. You've got to think for yourself how to do it. Similarly, not too difficult an angles question, but where's the starting point? They've got to think for themselves, perhaps by labeling 1 or 2 extra angles on the diagram before logically, step by step, working out a chain of calculations until they get their final results. 6 marks available for the whole question and just a blank canvas to work on. No answer boxes to fill in, so they have to make their answers clear. Coordinate geometry, very similar to current questions. There's no real difference here, so I haven't put the question down. That might be slightly harder than most examples on this paper I've made up. Now, this is a little different. Drawing straight line graphs. This is very similar to what they would do now, except they would be led through by being given a table and perhaps even given the values of x to work out values of y. Here, they've got to do it all themselves. How are they going to do it? They may well draw a table of values. And if they're smart, they may think, well, I'm going to choose multiples of 3 for my values of x, so I'll get nice whole number answers. Of course, they could choose a completely different way to do it. There was a supplementary question here of drawing a perpendicular line as well. And I expect them to do that in pencil, of course, but I'm doing a pen to make it clear. And towards the end of the paper, we're getting some interesting puzzles, interesting problems. Perhaps not necessarily very testing, but interesting to inspire and to make children think for themselves. Generally, these puzzles are going to be worth 4 marks each. So how would you place 3 of those isosceles trapezia together to make an equilateral triangle? Well, there's a nice, neat little solution. But you might expect them to try and try again, maybe get it wrong, but get a mark or 2 for giving it a go, and then be interested in to see the real answer when they've finished the exam. I don't think this is necessarily the best question I made up here, but again, an open-ended 4-mark puzzle question. How are you going to solve it? Maybe various ways of doing it. and you may pick up 1 or 2 or 3 marks for giving it a good go. And a typical question towards the end of the paper. Again, just ask the question. They've got to puzzle their way through. And that's the end of my little practice non-calculator paper, and now a calculator paper. So, not a dissimilar start to current level 2, except they're not being, again, asked to round each number off one significant figure, work out your answer to part 1. What are they doing that for? They have no idea what they're doing. They could do an estimate. Of course, you might expect them to estimate that as they go along, but we're just testing their calculator skills there. And we're trying to do a few more questions that actually involve using a calculator on the calculator paper, because currently, or the level 2, there isn't that many, to be honest. So looks a little bit more like level 1 to begin with. Some practical sort of questions. Keeping the ratios a bit simpler than currently. So here we've got 2 parts to the ratio instead of often 3, and fewer parts to the question as well. Why do we have to do each type of ratio every time? Just a sample of the questions perhaps is enough. Percentage questions, very similar to current level 2 questions, but notice 3 marks available for that one because you've got to put your units on the end. Some more algebra. Nice, straightforward, simple algebra, very similar to current questions, except if you look at part B1 and 2 there, giving you 2 questions. So the first one is more accessible, more straightforward. It's not always a negative sign outside the bracket. You might get one and the other to test you a bit more thoroughly and give a chance for weaker candidates to pick up some marks as well. Factorizing. And there's another little problem question, again, forming an equation and solving it. I don't think actually you get both those questions on a pair of papers like that. As I said, this is not a real sample paper. Question 10, bit of pi. Very similar to what they have now, but fewer parts perhaps. And they expected to show their units on the end. 6 marks for the pair. Probability. Similar to current level 2 question, probably. Perhaps fewer parts. I like question 12 here I made up because it's less routine, less expected, a bit more of a puzzle. Calculate the number of sides of the complete polygon. What are you going to do? No idea. Well, you could think about working out an interior angle. It's half the interior angle. That would be the first step. And then the exterior angle, and from that you could work out the number of sides. But it's up to them to find their own route, and they might go down the wrong avenue. They might get good credit for a good attempt, but it's not being led through step by step. So on balance, the paper is easier at the start and more predictable at the start, and then perhaps slightly harder towards the end, or perhaps more interesting and thought-provoking towards the end. So that question isn't difficult, but it's perhaps slightly more novel. It's not your standard angles question. Very routine cuboid question, finding the volume and the total surface area. But we're not providing any guidelines or starting points for the isometric drawing. They've got to think for themselves how to orientate it and where to start. We'll give them more space than that. I've cut down the space here for the PowerPoint to fit on the screen. Speed, distance, and time. Again, only a couple of parts instead of maybe 3 like we normally get at the moment, making the paper a little lighter, shorter. With speed, and distance, and time, we're thinking to tie in more with science and make the questions a little bit more formula-based, perhaps, rather than working with 20 minutes or 15 minutes, where you might be using sort of ratio-type methods to work out speed, distance, and time. We want ones that will work using the formula, or by other means as well, but keep it more consistent with science, perhaps. Oh, there is another part there. Conversion graph, very similar to current questions, except they might not just get a straight line. They could have a curve. They could have any sort of graph they could read values from. Of course, if it was a curve, they wouldn't be asked to draw it. It would be drawn for them. And here's a little sort of investigative style question towards the end. I'm sure we all know that angle B is twice as big as angle A, but they led through that a little bit to take some measurements to find out, oh, they are all double, aren't they? That's interesting. And then they can try and work out for themselves if it's true for a nonagon. A little bit like a sort of proof. Typical sort of pattern question towards the end, but not giving them a table to begin with. Just asking them to work it out themselves. There's the additional paper. So once your candidates have all taken the core, bar a few who would do the foundation, then your brighter candidates could go on to tackle the additional paper, which is a single calculator paper on top of the core papers. They've probably found the core papers pretty straightforward if they're up for the additional. And now it's straight additional questions. There's no sort of money questions. There's no sort of questions that overlap with the level 2. It's Pythagoras, pi, standard form. It's the more advanced topics. But we're also trying to include problem-solving type questions and puzzles as well. So it's not quite going back to the old style paper 3 from 20-odd years ago. Similar, but hopefully updated and a bit more creative. Hence, we're starting here with a little, this is from the specimen, by the way, starting here with a little puzzle before going on to some Pythagoras. You're on familiar territory. Simultaneous equations and the like. Just what you might expect from current level 3, but without the sort of routine, mundane level 2 type questions thrown in, and not making it more awkward. I think we've been guilty of making questions more difficult by just making the questions harder to access with more words and being more confusing. That's not what we're after. We're trying to keep the questions simple, but involving a higher level thought, higher level maths. More advanced algebra going on there. So 5B and C would involve factorizing. Given a little clue with part A there to factorize that, and then hopefully they would realize they would have to factorize the top line on part B and do some numerical factorizing to simplify that expression there. How would you work it out without a calculator? And clearly they can check on the calculator if they do get it right, but it's quite satisfying to see that that comes out very nicely without a calculator. And that's what maths is all about, solving those problems. Plotting parabola, curve plotting. Only difference here again is we've taken away a table of values. So it's up to them to make up their own table of values or find another way to plot their parabola. And then they'd expect to either take readings or effectively solve an equation with a straight line subsequently. Now, that's all very well. What about the weaker candidates? I think increasingly we have a greater range of ability of pupils in prep schools these days. And I think it's important we cater for them. I think in the past, weaker children were somewhat neglected and just expected to do their best and fail, and therefore not enjoy maths, not flourish. And I think every candidate should be aiming for a paper they can access and can succeed at. So hopefully, where possible, the very weaker candidates will have the foundation paper, which is going to be at an easier level, a more basic level than the current level 1, based on more practical skills, more whole number work. So the core is designed to accommodate a broader range. So many level 1 candidates hopefully will be taking the core, but the ones who really can't manage it, the very weakest, here's the foundation paper for them. So again, this is taken from the specimen. Here's the non-calculator paper, setting out some arithmetic for them, some place value style questions, very core, important work. which I'm sure we wouldn't want children moving on to senior schools without having a full understanding of. Multiple choice. Again, it's all about understanding. So they haven't got to do any hard work here, but they do need to understand what these operations mean and how to apply them. Again, the meaning of area. Do you understand what area means? Not a formula, not how do you work it out, but area is this two-dimensional space covering this surface. So perhaps counting squares is a good way of doing it. And notice there's no units on the answer line. So one of those marks there is for your units. Nice basic angle questions. Below that, below the vertically opposite angles and the angles at a point there was also angles in a triangle. Good core foundation skills, not making it difficult. Something on which they can build. Some core algebra skills and order of operations. But we're also going to throw in some nice, straightforward puzzles and problems as well. Probably when they've experienced counting various different shapes a few times, they wouldn't find these too hard, but hopefully they'll enjoy doing it and they'll inspire them to do more maths later on. Now, the calculator foundation paper. So there is a calculator and non-calculator. And again, we're going to be testing straight calculator skills at a nice basic level. So question 3 there, I don't know what happened to question 2, but question 3 there, reverse operations. Question 4, we're testing the understanding of fractions. How big is a fraction? Hopefully understanding that a proper fraction is less than 1. Giving a ballpark figure, it's a bit more than 3/4, somewhere less than 1. Metric units, again with multiple choice, nice and accessible. I guess this is about your average year 6 level, to be honest. We do get a very broad range. Certainly I teach a very broad range of children, and the weakest in year 8 could probably do quite well at a basic year 6 level, and that's good for them to go on to their senior schools with some success and achieving in mathematics rather than just failing at too high a level. Some nice basic symmetry. The second part's harder than the first. And do you know some core vocabulary? Do you know the names of these shapes? Practical skills. How practical that will be in 10 years' time, I don't know, when everybody's just using Apple Pay and flashing their contactless cards. I don't know, but I think currently people should know a little bit about money. So, the new maths common entrance. To ensure a good foundation of basic skills for everybody. We want to make sure people are good at their basic maths. Not moving on too fast, not skipping out the basics, being pushed on to too high a level. And I think senior schools really appreciate that, giving them a good foundation for the future. To engender a love of the subject. So again, talking about inspiration. And part of that, of course, comes from trimming the exams down, giving more time and space in the curriculum to do other things, to be more creative, to go off-piste. More success, and more success should feed back through motivation to more enthusiastic children wanting to take the subject further. Problem solving and resilience. It's awful to see children just, oh, I don't know how to do it, I can't do it, and give up. But give a question they can't do, and to try, to succeed a little, to try again, is a very, very good way forward, I think. And resilience is very important. But genuine problem solving, not problems they've rehearsed, problems they've practiced, but something novel and interesting, hopefully. To reduce the pressure and stress. So children aren't under pressure to get through their exams. I mean, for many children, these are not entrance exams anymore. They are exit exams from their prep school. So we're celebrating their success and giving them like a badge of honor to say, well done, you've done really well, and you're in good stead for your senior schools. So more time and space for off-curriculum teaching, going off-piste, as I said. I mean, I go off-piste and I look at strange things. That's not too strange. Using compasses to draw flower patterns, that's just a bit more fun than bearings, maybe. Building polyhedra. I remember in year 8 building a great dodecahedron. I spent about 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon with a great big piece of card, again constructing it with compasses, cutting this thing out and taking it to the teacher, who then said I was too late and wouldn't hang it up on the wall. So you remember these things, but I still remember that great dodecahedron. Interesting patterns and puzzles, interesting tessellations. I was talking about the Fibonacci sequence earlier. This is actually curve stitching, I think, in the middle there, isn't it? Along with the tessellation of those equilateral triangles, which form rhombuses and isosceles trapezium and parallelograms and all sorts of things. There's a 6-pointed star. What's that? Dodecagon. Coding. This is something that I think perhaps we lack a little bit in this country. Perhaps if we have more time in our curriculum, perhaps a little bit of maths can be put forward to coding. Certainly I teach them a bit of binary in the course of math lessons, which is outside the syllabus, which they find fascinating. And look at that, that might link up with design technology. I'm sure that's being 3D printed, and that's a 3-dimensional version of Zaplinx. I can't say his name. Zaplinx. No, not going to try again. Triangle, but square base pyramid. So I hope that's a little bit informative and helpful. I don't know if anybody's out there to hand back to. I hope somebody's been listening, because I've just been talking to myself all this time.
We definitely have people listening, Patrick, and thank you so much. That was excellent. Now, what we do have is an awful lot of questions from people, all of which I think are going to be really relevant to maths teachers preparing pupils for CE. So I'm just going to start with something that's coming from the chat now, and it's just a reminder to everybody on chat. Make sure you send in your questions. Make sure you're logged in first. If you can't type a question, that will be why. But one initially from Sam Down, who said, will the mental test still be taken in May?
I think that's correct. I believe it's going to be taken in May. It's going to be easier to administer rather than setting up a room with CD and speakers and stress children. It'll just be dishing out a paper, 10 minutes, get on with it, job done. So yeah, I think it's going to get done at the same time, and I think everybody's going to enjoy the mental test now. And it's a proper mental test, not some convoluted, contrived, rather awkward maths in disguise test as it's been recently, I think. So looking forward to it.
Well, and in fact, when we're talking about mental maths, and because you're the expert and you're here, can you tell us a little bit about, as you designed it, what was the ethos behind that? You're saying it's a proper mental maths test. Tell us, from your perspective, what does that mean?
Well, encouraging good mental skills. First of all, times tables. I think a while back, people thought you don't need to teach times tables anymore, but I think more and more people have realized times tables are really helpful, really useful with fluency and confidence and speed with children. So just some straight times tables to begin with. But then little tips and tricks to work things out quickly in your head, empower children. So how do you do 15 times 18? Oh, I don't know, 30 times 9, 3, 270. If you can do that sort of thing in your head, and children can, if they're given these little tips and tricks, it empowers them to have confidence in mathematics and give them success on these sort of papers. I think the children will be much happier.
Wonderful. So your advice would be, if we were preparing kids for that mental maths paper, is throwing problems out there like that. But, and as you're rehearsing with them, instead of just expecting them to answer, is actually helping go through those little problem solving tips, or breaking that down for them is a good way to practice, is it?
Yes, giving them the strategies, giving them those tips, and they love it. I mean, you ask children in year 5, what's 17 times 11? You say, 187. So how do you do that? 187. And then you get them to gradually realize it's 1 plus 7 is 8. 187. So 14 times 11, 154. Oh gosh. And suddenly they can do things that their parents can't do. They can go home and they can test their mum. What's 18 times 11? 198. Too slow. And yeah, giving them those techniques and tricks, they love it. And it's not mundane. It's not, I've got to do 23 plus 34, carry the 1, divide by 2, I'm bored.
Do you know what, actually? So it is clearly, although my children don't go to your school, Patrick, but it clearly is a maths teacher like you that is to blame for, me being in the kitchen trying to do something else and my daughter throwing hard maths that her parents can't do at me. But I can definitely say that children love those sort of quite competitive, quick fire answer rounds. So yeah, I think that's really helped bring that to life, actually. I've got one from Rachel Clough, who has said, could you talk a little bit about maths at scholarship level, please?
Yes, we are modifying the scholarship papers just a little bit. We think they've probably got a little bit too hard lately. Again, a broader range of candidates are being entered for scholarship. It's not quite like in the old days where it was a very elitist event. And so to accommodate for the broader range, we're making them a bit more progressive. We're starting them off a little bit easier at the beginning and just as hard and challenging towards the end. But hopefully more of those candidates will succeed rather than just scraping 20, 30% if they're not real math scholars. Because plenty of people will be put forward who are good at languages or good in the arts, and maths might be a second subject. And just to really go forward and fail at math scholarship isn't a good thing. They might pick up a little award on the way, but what's it done to their maths and confidence in the meantime? So we're going to make it a little easier, a bit more accessible, a bit more progressive, but still just as challenging towards the end of the papers.
Absolutely. And I've actually just, Patrick, had something in from one of our staff at ISEB just to confirm, Sam. Will the mental test still be taken in May? I've got here, it's been scheduled in with the full exam week. So there you go. We've got ISEB staff at the ready answering questions for us as well. So thank you very much to those of you out there. I've also just we've got an extra half day in the exam week that will allow that to be taken. So it will be scheduled for you, Sam. So that should hopefully make life much, much easier for you. So I've got, whilst we wait for some more to come in on the chat, there are some questions that you very brilliantly sent in beforehand. So thank you to those, whoever in the audience asked this one. I've got quite a long one, Patrick, but bear with me. We found that one of the biggest challenges on the maths paper is completing the full 100 marks within an hour. And that's far more candidates fail to finish the maths paper compared to other subjects. Is there an intention to reduce the length of papers?
Yes.
To reduce the time pressure?
I think this has been a real problem over the years. The papers have grown. They've got bigger and bigger. There have been fewer marks per question, and children have struggled to finish the papers. To do the papers well, you've got to practice and practice, and it's a bit of a race, and that's not really how you should be doing your maths. If you look at papers from 20, 30 years ago, they were shorter and lighter, and children could finish quite comfortably. I remember at school myself doing Common Entrance. I got quite good actually in year 8 at Common Entrance papers, and I was finishing the paper with a good 10 minutes to spare, enough time to check and make sure I'd done it really thoroughly, which was very rewarding. But now I see a lot of children struggling to finish, and more parents are sort of asking, can we get extra time? And they're trying to go through different routes to get that, which I don't think is the right way forward. So hopefully we are making them shorter and with fewer words as well. The earlier questions might be quicker to do. We're not sure how it's going to pan out yet, of course. We want to get feedback from schools when they do them to see how the children have accessed the papers. But yes, that is the intention, certainly, for them to be shorter. However, they might not finish one or two of the puzzle questions towards the end because they are open-ended. But there's only about 15, possibly 20 marks weighted on those puzzly questions. So they wouldn't be disadvantaged too much, and they certainly would be picking up marks for giving them a go anyway.
Lovely, thank you very much. Just a clarification here, just coming on the chat from Rachel, who has asked, when will those scholarship papers be available, please?
Well, the next round of scholarship papers, are they the slightly newer style? I'm not sure. No, at the same time as the new round of CE, they're going to be slightly newer style common scholarship papers, I believe. Yeah.
Lovely. Great. And so, and Rachel, just if you wanted to get hold of some of those case papers, as soon as the exam session is finished, you can actually advance order papers if you wanted those for your school almost straight afterwards. Specimen papers, at the moment, what we are doing is we've got, I think there are some specimen papers available, aren't there, Patrick? And I've actually got a few questions about those. But in terms of additional specimen papers, we are looking to get some teams together over the summer to help start producing some additional resources for you. And so I've got a question in from Hannah. Will there be any other sample papers that we may be able to have for our pupils to trial? At the moment, we've got the specimen papers that are already out there and produced. We haven't got a significant number of additional practice resources. You're very welcome, Rachel. Additional number of practice resources. You can buy past papers from our publisher Galore Park at the moment, and then from ISEB moving forward from the 1st of August. What we'd like to be able to do is obviously to help support new CE with the first papers coming in November, is try and get you some more resources coming through ready for the autumn. So if you leave that with me and the team, we will start to have a look about all the other ways that we can support you, as well as with this CPD.
I mean, for most candidates taking it in the summer, there should be the autumn papers and the spring papers, which could be used as practice. So they should be fairly familiar with the style, along with the specimen papers as well. So they have 3 practice papers effectively before the real thing.
Lovely. Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. Now let's go to, I've got another long question, but a very interesting one. And so it's a good commendation. I think the extension paper looks great. Some really interesting mathematical problems. On first glance, though, it seems closer to CASE, that's the academic scholarship CASE level, than the old level 3, and certainly a challenge. Would you anticipate a smaller proportion of candidates taking it than currently sit level 3? And do you know of any senior schools who might suggest candidates take that paper, as is the case with level 3? So I think probably what they mean there is, you know, level 3 is challenging. Is there, how have you calibrated those levels? I think is probably the first part of that question.
Well, first of all, I'm sure some of the more prestigious schools, such as Eton, are going to require the additional paper. I think the specimen paper was perhaps a little bit on the hard side. I think the real things might be toned down slightly, pulled back slightly from that. But it is designed to be a challenge, and they are much easier once you've done a few practices, to be honest. Once you've practiced, you can recognize a simultaneous equation question, you can recognize the Pythagoras question once you've seen 2 or 3 of them done. And I know from my experience of teaching the old level 3 that the scores went up and up by doing 2 or 3 practice papers, certainly. But yes, I think the specimen paper was a little bit too challenging and perhaps a little bit too long. So we're pulling back from that slightly. I don't know if we want it quite halfway to CASE. We want it certainly easier, more accessible than CASE, but we do want it a significant challenge above the core. And the other thing to remember, of course, it's a bonus paper. You've already achieved well. If you're taking that additional paper, you should have got good A grades at the core. And so anything you do beyond that should be in your credit. You know, if you only get 50%, well, you've got half of an additional paper. Right, we're correct, which is great. We'll have to see how it goes. And again, we'd like feedback. We'd like to see how candidates access it and how they achieve, and we'll modify it in the future accordingly.
Thank you. Ruth has just asked, will CE 11 Plus be updated to be more in line with the new style 13 Plus? We will be looking at 11 Plus CE, Ruth, next year. So at the moment, CE 11 Plus coming in autumn 23 will be a similar style to the way it was this year, but we will be looking to review CE 11 Plus in the future too. So watch this space. So we have some other questions that have come in previously. I don't know, you'll have to explain this one to me, Patrick. Regarding the changes in the new CE, does it really have to be double underlined? If the answer has been made very clear in an alternative way, e.g. single underlined, box drawn round, answer equals, will they still lose marks?
Absolutely not. Of course, if they make their answer clear, that's going to be completely acceptable. It's just the way we thought would be the standard way of doing it would be to double underline. But if they want to circle their final answer, make it clear, that's absolutely fine. And of course, it's up to the examiner, up to the person marking the papers. If they want to stick to the rules to the letter, that's up to them. But I'm sure any mathematician marking the papers will accept the correct answer if it's clear.
Absolutely, I think you're right too. There's another one about sort of marks, potential of marks being lost. It's a measure of how conscientious teachers are in making sure their pupils do well. If they forget to write units of measure throughout the entire exam, how many marks are being removed in total?
Yeah. Yes, of course, we are going to limit this. There's going to be an instruction somewhere to limit it probably to 3 marks lost for rounding errors and 3 marks lost globally for lack of units, except when it's explicitly required to round something or to provide a unit. So yes, if they, 10 times they've forgotten to write centimeters, they're not going to lose 10 marks. 3, I think, would be a good. It's a token, really, to encourage them to do it, to encourage them to think and do it properly.
Lovely. I've just had, apologies for not seeing this one sooner. I've just had one in from Nicola Hunter. Can we have the specimen papers without the word specimen written across them? Now, I can take this one. The only reason that we have them out there with specimen written on is because as an exam board, we need to make it really, really clear which resources are which are authentic past papers and which are specimens. So unfortunately, we can't produce specimen papers without specimen written across them. However, as Patrick mentioned, autumn and spring papers will be available as sort of true past papers without anything written across them that look like authentic exam papers. And as I mentioned in answer to Hannah's question, we will try and get some more supporting resources out there for you as soon as we can to make sure that you have things that you can use with your pupils.
You could get a large bottle of Tipex and spend a lot of, and you could probably sell your result when you've finished as well. A bit of black market dealing, probably. I think. Clean paper.
We love Tipex and a photocopy, although I can already feel my inbox filling up with sort of lawsuits as we speak. So what else have we got here? This is a good question, actually. How much do you anticipate changing papers for next year compared to the sample paper? So I think probably what's meant by that question is, is what's been given for the sample, the specimen, sort of a true, authentic.
Yeah. Well, there are 2 parts to that. First of all, we're listening to more feedback as we're going on from the sample papers, so we're modifying slightly the direction for the real thing. But secondly, the paper split into 2 parts, really. One part is supposed to be quite predictable. Can you do your fractions? Can you add? Can you do your basic maths? So that should be fairly predictable. But we're always going to try and make the problem questions towards the end unpredictable, so they will be different quite deliberately, unexpected. But we expect children who are well prepared to get most of the paper right because it's predictable, and if they can do it, they're good mathematicians. They can do the basic maths, but as unpredictable as possible for the problem questions, while not being too hard and also being accessible.
Lovely. Okay. Oh, interesting one here. Although I know that you addressed this a little bit in your presentation, Patrick, but I'll ask it again anyway. Have there been any trials of the materials published so far? What were the outcomes? Very maths teacher question, isn't it? Where's the data? Yes. Brilliant question. I'm particularly concerned about the response to open or unstructured questions, which I worry might be answered quickly, brackets and badly, by many, yes, leaving them occupied in an exam room. So good question. Yeah.
Yes, they have been trialled. The mental test was trialled extensively a long time ago, and that was a very successful trial. But also the core papers and the additional paper were trialled in a number of schools. The children enjoyed doing the core papers. The feedback was generally positive. Some, of course, didn't like change to style. Any change is always not liked by some. The additional paper was interesting in that a lot of children liked it, but because it was the first time they'd tried it, they found it quite hard. But they said that they really enjoyed the experience and wanted to give it another go. And in one school, the scores were not terribly high first time round, but I could see if they did a couple of practices, they would really rise up. And that goes back to years ago when we did the old-fashioned level paper three. We could see that early on they thought, God, these are hard, these are really difficult papers. But the sense of achievement after 6 months of working towards them, and then achieving high scores towards the end, was palpable, because they felt like they climbed a mountain and climbed to the top and succeeded, if they were up for it. And in my experience, most top set children were up for those additional papers and did jolly well, and really felt proud of their achievements, which was wonderful, inspiring and challenging in a way I think we really should continue to do in ISEB.
Fab. I've got a good question come in on the chat from Helen. Is there a set split between the fluency and problem-solving questions, e.g. 40%?
Not precisely, no. I alluded to this earlier. Probably about 15, possibly 20% on the problem-solving questions, and the fluency questions forming the bulk of the paper, yeah. But some of those fluency questions, as I said, are less structured, less scaffolded, but hopefully easier. So if a question is too hard, don't tell them how to do it, just give them an easier question. That's the philosophy, really.
Lovely. I've got another one coming in here. What are people doing about deciding entry policies to the additional paper? Have we gathered any info about senior schools' expectation on this point?
I don't know. As I said, I'm sure schools like Eton are going to require the additional paper. I'm sure many would love to see additional paper being done. It is a bonus paper, so it can't detract from your success at the core. But do we know? I don't know if we had any feedback. Have we, Julian?
Senior schools tend not to give us their expectations. They tend to go straight to the feeder schools. So we produce the papers for them, but we don't often get feedback unless there's something they particularly want us to change with the papers, and we've had nothing in about that so far. So
I have to say, these papers have been seen by a number of representatives of the senior schools, and they've been very pleased with them. They've been very pleased because of the foundation that they're putting in place. So they're hoping children will come up with a more solid grasp of the basics. And they were very pleased with the encouraging children to think as well, rather than just to go through the motions and reproduce what they've been taught, opening up their minds. So the feedback we have had from the people who've been involved in the process from the senior schools has been very positive.
Lovely. There's something in here on the chat from Sam Down that I can take. Are there suggested grade boundaries? And if so, what would you expect a student previously getting a B to get on the new core paper? One of our members of staff here has said that there have been formulae in the past. A multiplier from the old level 1 to level 2 was 0.75, so that about
that multiplier just never worked. I mean, how do you compare one paper to another? It's not a sort of linear relationship. Sometimes you can do it and do well, but if you can't do it, you completely fail. So that's nonsense, really. I don't think we are going to suggest grade boundaries, but if we were, hopefully they'd be slightly higher than currently, because we're hoping children to get higher scores, so they get that sense of success. So maybe where we're suggesting 70% as an A, perhaps 75 might be an A, but I think we'll just have to see how it pans out. But also senior schools are idiosyncratic. They like to set their own standards. And so an A for one school might not be an A for another school. And that's part of the problem, really.
No, that's absolutely true, Patrick, and that remains, actually, just for everybody out there, that remains as we start to see a change in the way in which the common entrance is used. I think that's leading us, and particularly we had lots of really interesting conversations at IAPS conference this year about what ISEB might do to further support prep school marking and look at marking in the future. And whilst we don't have any sort of large things that we can be announcing on that. It's just to reassure people that we are constantly monitoring this and looking at it in the background. So thank you for any questions on those. Now, a question in from the audience for Neil that actually I can pick up, which is, will we see any changes in the Year 6 ISEB pre-test so that it's more reflective of this style and balance of questions? Now, interestingly, Neil, we have been reviewing and we are looking at the common pre-test now, and I've actually had in from one of our product managers here a little request, and she has said, for anybody out there, and if I'm speaking to maths teachers this evening, which I am, she has an exciting opportunity to join other maths teachers from prep and senior schools as a working party to develop new skills-based maths questions that can highlight pupils' natural maths ability and less affected by tutoring. Such questions might not rely on concept-based terminology. So for anybody, and Neil, this would be wonderful, please email us, for anybody interested in joining a maths working group over the summer to explore skills-based maths questions and to look at the way in which we can start really creating brilliant maths tests, regardless of the style of exam it is, please could you email us at pilot@iseb.co.uk. And what I will do, she says with her phone at the ready here, is I will make sure that I put that onto the chat now, because it would be wonderful to have as many of you as possible. Oh, thank you very much. That's just come up on the screen, and I will also put that in the chat on YouTube now. So thank you very much for that question, Neil. It almost appears as if you might be my audience stooge, but I can promise you all that that was absolutely authentic. I've got another really good question here, and I think this really tracks into what particularly Sam was mentioning about how we look at levels and boundaries. Is the existing specimen core paper easier or harder than level 2?
We are hoping to make it easier and harder. The core paper, the bulk of it, should be a little easier, or certainly to begin with, a little easier and more accessible, but then a little harder in terms of having to think for yourself. If you're a good thinker, a good problem solver, you won't find it harder. But it's a balance. Overall, it's going to be a little shorter, hopefully, more marks per question, so they should get higher scores with plenty of routine to begin with. So on balance, I want the core papers to be a little easier with more success.
Lovely. Well, then we have as the last question that was sent in beforehand, is the existing specimen foundation paper easier or harder? Yes. Level 1?
Very, considerably easier is the idea. The current level 1 has been designed to sort of mirror the level 2, and I think it's done a very, very good job. But the only problem is not many people have been allowed to do it where they perhaps really should have done. They've had to do the level 2. And so we're making the core a little more accessible for the majority, but still there's going to be the very weakest who need something easier if they're allowed to take it. And that core should be, as I said, about sort of year 6 level, to be honest. If they can do some good basic maths, that's a really good foundation than trying to fail higher level. So yeah, easier.
Lovely. And actually, I think I know that you've been over it, but perhaps, and if I just do a quick call out for any other questions from the floor now. Oh yes, Darren, I have posted, I thought I posted that pilot email. Bear with me, I should do it again. It's pilot@iseb.co.uk. Darren, apologies, I thought I put that on YouTube, but it may well have blocked it. Thank you very much. That's just gone up there. So yes, Patrick, I wonder if, final call out to questions from the floor, but I wonder if to end, we've had quite a lot of questions about levels and core, foundation, additional, and I wondered if you might be able to really summarize not only where you see each of those in terms of level, but also the ethos, because I know that as a team you have a really great ethos behind each of those levels, and I wondered if you could sort of summarize that for us as part of us sort of wrapping up this evening.
Well, we're wanting to make the whole thing a more positive experience, something that children will enjoy doing, not an ordeal, not a stressful experience, and feeling they're going to pass or fail. This is supposed to be a celebration of success at the end of their time at junior schools, and setting the foundations for the senior schools at the same time. But the biggest thing must be to leave more time for individual exploration, teaching down blind avenues, teaching blue sky thinking, off-piste teaching, inspirational teaching. So it's not all about the exam. The exam should be a slightly smaller part of what the children are aiming for. They should be aiming to be broader mathematicians who are interested, excited, inspired to take things further as they go forward. Hopefully the levels are going to cater to challenge the best at the additional level, still having got that core under their belt. And I took effectively core papers at junior school and an additional, and I got very high scores at the core, and I felt like I was a great mathematician because they were quite easy. I didn't do terribly well at the additional, but it was a bonus, and it was good to have given it a go. A bit of Pythagoras as well, which just set me up for the future. Success, and success breeds success. But really looking after those very weakest ones as well, nurturing those weak students and encouraging them, I think, is absolutely key as well. We've got to look after them at the same time. It's a new set of exams for a new world in which we live.
I think that's a really brilliant answer, actually, Patrick. I love the idea that, you know, what we're starting to look at now is that space for blue sky thinking, for problem solving, for thinking about maths in the world in which we live, rather than just on that paper. A lovely question in from Miss C. Moss from Kitebrook. I was at Kitebrook recently. Hello. Will the papers still be 100 marks and 1 hour long?
Yes.
Brilliant. So I will just throw out there any more questions from the floor. I have, which may be our final question, Patrick, but it really it seeds what we're going to be doing in June, and we'd love to see all of you again in June, and bring your friends, because we will have Paul Burrows and another brilliant math setter from our team. You've got, of course, you've got the chief here today, you've got the lead setter. But Patrick, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit. I know that within your team there have been some amazing discussions, and again, as we're looking for the future, as we're looking at a working group in the summer and thinking about, you know, maths questions, maths is one of those subjects that can often be seen as, you know, highly discreet. You know, you do that in a classroom, it's maths teachers over there. But what we do know is, in the world of work, we use maths every day. And actually, maths is a wonderful way to help us learn to solve problems that aren't, you know, even non-mathematical problems. There's so much that we can learn from those techniques. And I wondered if you might be able to give us just a little flavour from your perspective about the ways in which maths, maybe through project working, or how it could integrate into some cross-curricular learning. Tell us a little bit about your ethos towards problem solving, because I know you guys have put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah. My own teaching bodies, I'll end up talking about black holes, or I'll end up talking about fractal sequences or something, just because they're interesting and the children want to know about it. One amazing resource these days is YouTube. You know, in a classroom, you can put on YouTube and call up fascinating, interesting, educational and otherwise videos, which open up their minds in a way we couldn't have done, you know, even 10 years ago. And it's not all about passing an exam. Linking up with other subjects is really fascinating. I sometimes start teaching in French or Spanish in my lessons, just because it's weirdly interesting and it makes children laugh. And maths also links up with the classics. You know, there's Greek words in maths. What does a rhombus mean? Well, I think it comes from the Greek rhom, which means a flatfish, and of course a rhombus looks like a flatfish. Trapezium, what does that mean? A bizarre word. They think of the circus. I think trapezium means a table, or a small table. Of course, if you draw a trapeze and put legs on it, you've got a table. I guess that's where the word comes from. So cross-curricular is wonderful, and as I alluded to earlier with the coding and the 3D printing and art, I'm doing perspective drawing at the moment with my year 5s. The 3-point perspective drawing. We're drawing skyscrapers. Why? Wow. Because it's interesting. interesting, and they're learning maths at the same time. They're learning about parallel and horizontal and ruler skills and joining up points and the infinite horizon.
That's fantastic. Yeah, like I say, art and fractals, and you know what, maths, Patrick. It sounds like your maths classes are the ones to join. I think there's so much. And again, as I say to all of you, we're going to be exploring this in the next session, which is how maths can be a real gateway, not only to other subjects, but actually how sometimes people's, I was one of those annoying, boring-y, artsy people who actually came to enjoy maths much more in later life, because I realized that maths was embedded into some of the art, into music, which I loved. And so physics and maths became super interesting to me once I had to click myself that that's where it came from. And suddenly that really brought it to life. But what's amazing about the way in which you discuss it, and I know what Paul is discussing in the next session, is how to bring pupils like that along with us sooner and see even greater success. So it's wonderful to hear that, okay, whilst we're in the business of exams, what we really care about is setting exams that mean that the teaching and learning can be really exciting. And that's what we always hear from you, Patrick. And actually, given your background, you've definitely won the prize for this season's CPD sessions Best Background. We're loving the glitter ball there. But just a huge thanks for such an interesting session and for leaving us with so much excitement, so many ways in which we can bring maths to young people. So thank you for, as ever, your enthusiasm, your brilliance, and being our lead setter. And to everybody who joined us tonight, please do come and join working groups in the summer. We would love to see you on social media. Most importantly, Patrick and Paul, I'm sure, would love to see you again in the summer in June. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you know where to find us. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for joining us. We will see you again soon.